me an intro for you, but I already had the headset on, so I don't know what the intro was. So I'll tell you what I made up instead, and you can tell me if it's correct or not.
Okay, as long as it's not complicated.
It's not terribly complicated. No, I was just going to say it takes a special kind of guy to watch Star Trek, to see all of the stars and to hear all the stars referenced, and to look at the whole thing and say, well, that doesn't look right. That should be there, that should be there, those should be over there. And am I correct that that is how stellar cartography, the first one, was born?
It pretty much was, although it was more a case of, here's Bijo's concordance, look at all these loose stars, they ought to be organized.
Gotcha. Bijo, by the way, being Bijo Trimble.
Trimble,
and this, by the way, is Dr. Trek Larry Nemecek, he of Stellar Cartography and Trek Tuesdays and the Star Trek The Next Generation Companion. And, of course, the Trek Files, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast. So this is. I'm sorry, now back to where you were saying. Bijo had a whole list of stars and they didn't seem to go anywhere?
Well, in the original concordance, the original Memory Alpha on Dead Tree Media on paper in the 70s, and I was just struck with, along with all the characters and planets and, gear and all that, and people, here's all these stars and planets. You don't think about it when you're watching shows, but when you see it all in an encyclopedia type format, and you go, oh. And I was a NASA kid before I was a Star Trek kid. I wasn't I read sci-fi, but I was big in the real space program and a little bit of, like backyard stargazing kind of thing. So I knew, obviously Alpha Centauri is a real star, and Rigel and Capella, and then all the fakey Star Trek stars that they made up too. But I was just kind of intrigued that this should be organized, and went down that path at the beginning. Did my own, got it sucked into another piece. I'm starting here. I simplified what we're going to have tonight, but there were a couple of iterations before. Are we starting? Are we going?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay,
that was me introducing you and letting you,
This is it. Okay. Well, I'm going to start with the first one here. I guess I'm going to do this. Bang. Right? Why am I not there? Okay, John, my guardian angel. Why am I not? I'm poking. I'm highlighting.
Highlighting one with pull trigger. Look up on screen.
Oops. There we go.
Oh.
There you go. Yeah.
There we go. Yay. Okay, I have his bottom trigger. Yes. This is Mike Okuda's sketch for you can read the bottom there, the in-house writer's technical manual, not the professional one that was for pocketbooks. This is like fourth season. So 87, 88, 89, 90, 91. So 90.
Fourth season of Next Gen.
Fourth season of Next Generation, right. This is the first time Mike put the galactic disk together. So like this is, you're looking at the Milky Way from the top view. And that's really the way everybody, if you imagine it like a plate, it's kind of like a plate. Until recently, that was supposedly 100,000 light years across and only about 10 thick. So I did one of my Trekland Tuesdays live recently where I actually had a plate and turned it sideways because it's very thin if you look at it from the edge. But everybody, when you look at a star chart, you're looking at it from the top. Just like when you look at an Earth map, north is always to the top. What's wacky is, before Mike did this, actually in the third season, for the price, remember the Barzan wormhole? And they were bidding on the wormhole, and the Ferengis are bidding, and they want to go explore it, and it's an unstable wormhole, and they get stuck out in the middle of either the Gamma or the Delta Quadrant, I forget. And Geordi and Data almost get stuck with them, but they get back. That was the first time anybody mentioned Alpha and Beta Quadrant, because they never needed a big time, we've got to indicate a huge distance. So for that episode, Mike and Rick Sternbach, who were the science advisors, and whoever else was a science advisor then, came up with the whole quadrant system for the first time. So that's why you never see it in the original series. I mean, it wasn't a thing. And they would kind of throw terms like sector and quadrant around kind of crazy that now people go back to literally. But they were just spacey space names, words. When Koloth in Trouble with Tribbles says, that's why half the quadrant is learning to speak Klingonese. And people now go, oh, is it the Alpha Quadrant, the Beta? It's like they're just throwing the word around. They didn't think about that then, or any of this stuff. But because of the price, I keep thinking I can I can't do like a laser pointer effect, can I? Can I do a laser pointer effect with my?
No, usually you have to have that kind of thing built in.
Oh, okay. Because I'm seeing a laser pointer, so it feels like it. But basically, look, if you think of that as a clock face, and the middle is the galactic center, and with its own barrier according to Star Trek V. But Earth, Sol, our star, and Earth is really like where he's got it indicated. It's about that far out from the middle. And yeah, there's this like crosshairs, so you can think of it as a clock face. But that's totally Star Trek. That's totally fictional. Mike came up with this idea, and just like, the Greenwich Meridian is where the time zones are figured from. And you say, why is it Greenwich, England? Well, England was the top dog at the time, and it was their thing. So they draw them all from Greenwich, England. Well, I've seen lately people go, why are the quadrants based on the solar system? It's like, well, because it was Earth and the Federation, and it's our system, so yeah, is the logic behind it. But that way, if you draw a diameter through the Milky Way in the galactic plane view here, PLANE, not PLAIN, it's pretty fancy for a plane view. But if you draw it through the Sol system, through Earth, and then you do your 90 degrees, that's what the quadrants are. So the alpha and the beta are down here, and the gamma and the delta. Now, in the beginning, in the price, they just needed to be able to say, oh, the Ferengis were lost in the delta quadrant. Actually, it was the delta quadrant, because then years later, Voyager did a story where they actually found those guys, if you remember. So, Geordi and Data get back, and the Barzan wormhole turns out to be unstable and it's a fake. But that's the first time any of this was set up. Now, as Mike did it and they went into the next year in the fourth season, see, this is for the fourth season, he said, okay, well, if we're gonna have the Federation here, we'll make the Romulans here and the Klingons here. So the neutral zone with the Romulans is there. And here's about what we've explored. And the Borg had been established, right, with Q-Who, and Best of Both Worlds has happened. So he threw the Borg way up here in the Delta. And, this is before DS9, so the Gamma is just unexplored space. But Mike did the best thing an art person on a TV show staff like this would do is he organized some things, but he left plenty of future expansion room, which you guys know is exactly what wound up happening. What's crazy is before this, and so now, ta-da, we have canon, it's on screen, it's in dialogue. But before this, when there was a lot of nothing when I was a kid, there were 2 or 3 iterations. And if you've ever played old school Starfleet battles, that's based on the map that Franz Joseph put in the old original series Starfleet technical manual in the 70s, which was not canon, but he came up with a version. And I worked with that in the beginning. Whole different side story, but the scale was really too big for what warp engines could get you. It was way too big. It was like, if you look at all that area of Earth, Klingons, and Romulus, that would have been like the Federation with the Klingons and Romulans to the side, which was way too big an area to make warp drive make sense. And then right before the motion picture, there was another thing called Star Trek Maps that came in a little cardboard pouch and with 2 big posters that unfolded. And they brought the scale in, but it was a different kind of setup altogether. I almost brought the images, but I was trying to keep it simple. But starting with Mike here, 3rd season, Next Generation, and then going into 4th season, everybody could visualize what things look like. And then in Jeffrey Mandel, when he did, okay, what am I doing? I got to do the...
You want the next one?
Yeah, it's the trigger. There we go. So it's fuzzing a little bit, but here's the pretty view of that, right? This was on our 2013 edition of Stellar Cartography, but really got to do props to Jeff Mandel, who was one of the graphic artists. And he and I, back in the day, I worked on this with him. It was my project when he was doing his zines, back again, Dead Tree Media, in the 80s, before either one of us had anything to do with Star Trek professionally. And it's weird because he was in New York and I was in Oklahoma. And I eventually met Jeff in the flesh at the Star Trek Generations art department, which was kind of amazing, like years later. But he wound up getting to work illustration jobs on the movies, and then he got to work the last year of Voyager, and then he worked the first couple of years of Enterprise. And when he did the first couple of years of Enterprise and everything was supposed to be close scale, like, oh, we're just getting off of Earth and everything is like not around the galaxy. We're barely beyond, Vulcan and Earth and the close planets. He took real astronomy and converted things to real stars and really fleshed out that so it made sense. So all the time you see those star charts in Archer and to Paul's quarters, that was Mike's work. And that's what led to his book, with a lot of us helping him, the Star Trek maps that came out in about 2002, 2003. And again, I'm trying to make this simple, so I didn't put the book covers of all these things in. But here's the pretty version of that, and this was the stepped-up version that was in our Stellar Cartography set in 2013. But basically, everything that's happened since Mike first did this, like, okay, Voyager's come back from the Delta Quadrant. When they mapped out what Voyager would be, they said, here's the Ocampa up here, 70,000 light years across the galaxy. Here would be a straight line right back to Earth, but of course it wasn't quite a straight line. And we worked in a lot of the, the Kazon and the Talaxians and the Ocampa, and then everybody that they met along the way, and the Borg transwarp tunnels and things. And then, of course, before Voyager, a couple of years, they decided that they wanted DS9 to have its own space, its own elbow room. So they put the Dominion, when they created the Dominion, and the Bajoran wormhole opened up over here, and then the Dominion came later. And that all got fleshed out. So again, Mike set this up with these big open spaces, and then as the years went by, they got, they were filled in. I guess that's technically a retcon, but that's how TV shows work. But that's why Mike is so smart, because he set all that up with plenty of room for the future writers to do whatever the hell they wanted to do and make it make sense. Plus, Jeff along the way put like all the dead empires. He sneaks in things from the animated series before they were even there. But so that's a big view. And he's also got, when people would supposedly leave the galaxy, or, the routes of some of the big Enterprise, the crazy missions. But again, that's using the real Milky Way, 100,000 light years across. Now, recently, I don't know if you saw this as a news story, they've decided they're going to redefine how the galaxy thins out at the edges. And now they say the galaxy is 200,000 light years across. But it doesn't mean that this suddenly like shrank in scale. It just means that the real boundaries of the galaxy are like further out. It's a bigger plate. It's a platter, not a plate now. But all these distances and relative things are relative to each other. Almost everything you see here, and I'm having trouble reading it, there are real astronomical references here, because when you get back to it, so there's your quadrant system, right? Okay. And we're set up for questions, guys. If you want to like pop off with something, I'm getting used to my virtuality here, but if you want to pop off with something, just yell. I've got about 15 of these, and we have Q&A for sure, but if something is just burning, I think I'm allowed to say that.
You can say burning, yeah.
Can I say burning?
You can say burning.
And pop up and everything. Mm-hmm. Now, I've been trying to date this. I don't know, because Mike did his about 1990, the fictional Star Trek quadrants, which make sense. They're centered on the galaxy center. Draw a line through Sol and do a 90 degrees to that, and there's your 4 alpha, beta, gamma, delta. I can't put a year to this, but here's the real. Oh, and since we figured out that we are a barred spiral, not just a simple spiral. So now all the recent galaxy maps have the barred in the middle there. But in real life, in real astronomy, they have galactic coordinates too, quadrants also. Except rather than like do a crosshairs on the galactic center, they actually use our system, the sun. And it gets you back to if you think about this, like you go out and you do star watching and you get like the skies and you like Polaris, and you're going to figure the constellations. Everything like that is what we've come up with to describe our sky looking at it from Earth. But constellations, all that is the visual, the way it looks from Earth. If you go to Vulcan or you go to Kronos, their skies are going to look different because the patterns of the stars are, it's a different point of view. It's a different fixed place in space. But so many people, till you kind of step back. It's like if you drew a map of the world from your bedroom when you're 2 years old. And the minute you figure out that there's a city outside your house, well, then now your map of things changes, has a different center. And now your house and your city is in a state, and your state's in a country, and your country is on a continent. Every time you get a bigger scope, right, your scale changes. Everything we think about as most of the time is our star charts and our constellations and right ascension and declination. That's all as long as you're standing somewhere on Earth. But the minute you get into Star Trek century and you're flipping around between stars, not only do you need warp drive to get there, but nothing that's set up for how things look from Earth, no one else cares. It's kind of pointless. So that's kind of why the galactic plane view makes sense, and looking at things from the big scope, right? But still, we're on Earth right now, and real science is looking at the quadrants from Earth. And so they've drawn the quadrants not based on the middle, but on the solar system. And they don't say alpha, beta, gamma, delta. They say quadrant 1, quadrant 2, quadrant 3. And they've just taken a zero line. They've taken the diameter and drawn it through the sun, but then they've done the crosshairs also through our system, not through the center of the galaxy. So, yeah, so 0 to 9 is like quadrant 1. Now, of course, you're going to see most of the galaxies on that side. So if you're really a real astronomer and this is a thing for you, most everything is going to be in the first quadrant and the fourth quadrant, see? There's not a red line coming out the bottom on this, but guys, I'm a hobby astronomer. I'm a backyard astronomer. I don't have a degree in physics or astronomy or anything. But so much of this is until you get into the physics and the chemistry and all that, the spectrum chasing and all that, it's all pretty, by the book. It's easy to understand, especially when you're on a Star Trek level. But it's interesting that since Mike did that, and I think people sometimes may get mixed up. I don't know when this was developed. I've been trying to find a year for it, but I think it's interesting that now eventually, when Cochrane comes along and we get a friggin' warp drive finally, and we start zipping around the galaxy, we probably won't keep basing our science on everything based on Earth and our solar system also. We'll get a little more galactic consciousness, right? Yes, yeah, it's totally in the Milky Way, unless you're doing something. Sorry? Well, there's a couple of times. The Kelvins, right? The Kelvins from Andromeda, the Andromeda Galaxy in back original series, they were outside. That's why you guys know what I'm talking about, right? By any other name? The Kelvins come in, they take human form, they hijack the Enterprise, and they make everybody into cubes except 4 people to, the leads, get to stay alive. And they actually, good on 60s Trek and their, early day opticals, they actually show the Enterprise shooting through totally, it wouldn't be completely galactic void, but they show them flying at high warp through a completely black void with the Andromeda Galaxy way in the back. Huh?
Didn't they also, the one with Gary Lockwood, didn't they actually go to the edge of the galaxy on that one? And they went outside for like 5 minutes, and then they got godly powers and had to come back.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what we've figured out with that is you go back and you go, if they were somewhere in the middle here, wouldn't that take forever to get to the edge of the galaxy? And that's why, think of it as a plate. And Jeff has done the same thing. I don't know if it's visible here. So the original Delta Vega, right, that happens near, think of it not so much you're going from the middle to the outside, and that's where the edge, the barrier at the galaxy's edge is. But the barrier is take your plate or your clock face and turn it sideways, and now you're looking edge on from the skinny part, right? And so the Enterprise was going, and that's how they got to the edge of the galaxy.
Okay, so you're saying
by going the thin way.
They're not going across the plate; they're just like going up through the top of it. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
And this is blurring out, but I think it's on there. But if you get his book or any of our things, you'll find, that's how we explain it away. So, guys, that's retconning at its best, right? Making it sense. Now, when I was a kid and doing my charts, this was because the bottom line here is there's a lot of fakey, fun, but fictional planets, obviously planet names, and stars. And at the time, they're all mixed in with real stars, right? Like Alpha Centauri to start there. And so in the day, this is me going through Bijo's Concordance, the original Star Trek Concordance, the encyclopedia of the 70s when it was just, no bloody A, B, C, or D. It was just the original 79 shows, and started on my star listing and charting, and just alphabetical order went through. And if it's got red here, that's where I found out it's a real star, because we have a real spectral class and a luminosity class there and a distance from Earth. So it started there, and if it's blank, that means it's a made-up thing, or it's something that's going to be an alien name for the same star that we have. But, that comes along. Because the thing about stellar cartography or something like with Star Trek, the basic thing is get the real science, get the basic layout, find the real stars, especially the landmarks, the common ones that people know, Rigel and Denobula and Capella and Alpha Centauri, but all of them, find those, and then now go back to the stories and figure out, the original series or Next Gen or whatever, where was the Enterprise going? Because in the day, they weren't doing this. When Gene wrote the notes for the Cage, they originally, I'm getting sloppy here. He would throw a star in that everybody knew, and Harvey P. Lynn or someone would say, that's kind of far away, actually. Why don't I suggest you use this or this? So I've got to watch I'm getting trigger happy, guys. Sorry. Turned completely away. So from the from the beginning, somebody was kind of trying to apply some real science. Like, that's really kind of way on out there. Like Rigel, a thing that Jeff had to deal with when he was first doing his book. Famously, in Doomsday Machine, you can't let that thing reach Rigel, like millions of people would die. It's on the way to the heart of our galaxy. Well, Rigel is, what he should have said was the heart of the Federation, because Rigel is off. But it's really too far away for it to have been the next stop from anything. It's so far out. So Jeff created a star, Beta Rigel, and that's what we all talk about, and we use that to kind of make that fit. So that's an occasion when things get a little massaged and retconned. Not because anybody made a mistake, like everybody loves to jump on now and go, that was a mistake. But it's just they were writers, and even their science people advising them, if they listened to them or if they were able to be hired, weren't up that way. Now, by the time Mike was doing this, doing his, come on, Bucky, I'm pointing right at you. There we go. By the time Mike was able to get to this and kind of set this as a touchstone, this was the first time anybody really put that level of detail to the big picture. But before that, it was just one-off stars, and people would try to come up with something. But that's kind of that's kind of an idea. When you see the red, those are real actual stars, and the blanks aren't. Now, I'll go to a chart in a second, but we talk about Alpha Centauri, alpha this, beta that, gamma that. That's what is called the Bayer class for stars. Basically, on Earth, we look up and the ancient peoples, the Arabs, a lot of ancient peoples, different cultures, we go with the ones the Greeks, Romans, Arabs came up with after their gods, after their myths. They came up with stories. They were trying to explain why the stars were the way, why some were brighter, and they had no concept that those were suns, possibly from other systems. They were just bright lights in the sky. But to them, they would make stories up with the patterns. That's where the constellations came from, right? So, Alpha Centauri is a centaur. So to them, it was just this, it might as well have been a 2D sphere outside the Earth. Now, in real life, now that we know stellar distances, we're looking at stars, and it's a constellation to us, but we're looking at it from where we are. And this is, again, why it makes no sense from somewhere. You go to another planet, nearby or far away, everything's going to look a different direction, right? The point of view changes. But even standing on Earth, we say, here's all the stars in the Centauri, in the Hydra, Gamma Hydra 4, right, by the neutral zone. Okay, so the constellation Hydra, the snake, Gamma, the way this scientist Bayer in the 1600s, again, standing on Earth, not knowing star distance, he's just looking at how bright they are. The brightest stars were, as they divided the sky up into the constellations and then made boundaries. So the Hydra constellation, okay, the brightest star in Hydra is Alpha Hydra. The next brightest is Beta Hydra. That's where the Greek letter in a constellation thing came from. Now, the ancients that weren't privy to, fancy, German, Greek, whatever, especially the Arabics, peoples, gave them proper names. So that's where, when you have a Rigel or a Deneb, it falls in Bayer's system too, but if it was bright enough and you could see it without a telescope, the ancients saw it that way and gave it a proper name. So, and that kept going. Who watches the Watchers, right? The Vulcanoids, the Proto-Vulcans of Mintaka 3. Mintaka is a real proper name, one of the Arabic names for, I forget the Bayer star, but Mintaka is a real star. So there's a thing you had to nail down. But you have that mix of names, and then when you see something like M42, there's a Messier catalog. There was an astronomer named Messier that saw hazy things in the sky and just cataloged them. And now we know some of them are nebulas, some of them are actually distant galaxies. Again, you're standing on Earth and not knowing what that stuff is, but they're cataloging it. So we got this whole crazy list of the ways we get names for stars and things. And then, but we do know where they are if they're real. And then if they were made up for Star Trek, then we get to fit those in by how the story works out.
Can I ask you a question really quickly?
Yeah.
Well, you say,
please
so
ask a question.
Well, we know that this is a star, and so you have to nail that down.
Right.
No, you don't. I mean, at what point when was it that somebody, and who was that somebody who said, all right, well, this just doesn't make sense? I mean, was that you? Was that someone else? I mean, when was it that somebody said, well, you got people going halfway across the galaxy for a star that it turns out was halfway across the galaxy the other way? I mean, at what point did people start caring about where the planets and stars were, like in an official capacity? Not somebody sitting at home going, well, that's stupid. They were at the edge of the galaxy last week and the center of it this week. I mean, at what point did somebody start trying to codify this? And was that you that did that? Or was it Bijo or who?
Well, Bijo just made the list of those just like she had the list of everything else. It was just a concordance entry.
Okay.
I started to do it. I don't know of anybody else in the 70s, but we're on stamp and paper days, right? Yeah. So I thought there's 8 other people in the country that cared about this. And Jeff Mandel thought that, and he was doing a nonfiction zine, you know, so he's got his techie stuff and his warp drive stuff, and here's the rooms of the Enterprise you didn't see, and here's how the saucer lands in an emergency, and here's what the triangles do when they fold down on the underside of the hull, you know, blah, blah, blah. And part of that was going to be this. Then the book in 79 was going to be redone, and it was going to be officially licensed. So we changed gears. I worked with him on that. That came out. It was very pretty, and there's a Nemecek star on that somewhere because he felt bad because our original project didn't happen. That's 1980, and we're in the fallow times of just movies. Then Next Gen comes out, and Mike Okuda is trying to kind of nail this down in a general way and pay homage to the original series stars and make it cool. And then by the time we get to third season, he's like, okay, this is getting pretty crowded. Let's start making some sense of it. And along the way, the science advisors would say, the Farpoint happened. Farpoint Station is it Deneb 4? I'm spitballing. There was another star, just like with the cave with Where No Man's Gone Before. They started to say a star that everybody knows, and someone, a science advisor, in a one-off situation, said that's really not going to work. I suggest you do blah 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 and use that. And then what Jeff Mandel started doing was taking all the random this and all the ones that came along from Next Gen and DS9 and Voyager. Voyager is easy because it's Delta Quadrant. Just put them in order out there. Don't worry so much about it. But the close-in places that are more like DS9 and Next Gen's territory, and especially Enterprise, and that's why he went taking a real chart and making it make sense. The other thing that's crazy is the Earth is tilted, and the ecliptic is the line that the sun goes through, which is why the constellations that are the zodiac constellations are the zodiac constellations, because that's the path of the year that the sun looks like it travels in kind of an arc up and down. And that's because we're tilted. We're like 23 degrees off. So when you look at Polaris, that's why Polaris makes sense as the North Star, because the rest of the sky map seems like it's rotating around it, but Polaris stays still. That's just because we're standing on Earth, and that's the way our viewpoint is. To somebody else on Saturn, it wouldn't look the same way, much less in another system. So it's that mix of here. So when I was it didn't make it. Okay, nope, sorry, I must have taken that out. But again, all of this that we're doing, that this thing that started with Mike Okuda, my abortive attempts and Jeff Mandel's, and then Mike doing it for real on the show, and then getting things published by Jeff Mandel's version. Jeff, it's all been about a mix of the real. And then if it didn't fit, we find a way. If there's some extreme cases, we find a way to make it fit. I mean, Wrath of Khan, let's start with Space Seed. Wrath of Khan, they famously maroon him on Ceti Alpha 5, right? Ceti Alpha 6. Well, Ceti Alpha, it's like, shouldn't that be Alpha Ceti, which is actually a named star? And we've just kind of said that Kirk and whatever, so they said Ceti Alpha, not Alpha Ceti. So we take the real Alpha Ceti and put that down, which kind of makes the whole Mutara Nebula thing kind of conveniently a little bit distant. So when Genesis Planet is, forbidden not or whatever,
yeah, it's fun.
It is kind of a little more down below. If you actually go back to his sketch,
on Twitch, like you saw, which is pretty crazy.
Alpha Ceti and the Mutara Nebula and all that's kind of down below where the Klingons and the bottom end of the Federation are. So that was like a happy accident. That happened that way. But it is a mix, and one thing that not good old class M planets, but the real stars have a spectral class based on their temperature.
Later.
And one of the things I learned this was if you're looking for stars with all the criteria that can have life-bearing type class M planets around them, this is "Oh Be a Fine Girl, Kiss Me" for the Mnemonic. But it's the F, G, K, and M stars that supposedly can have class M type planets around them. Like our star Sol is a G2, and then the classifications have numbers. So there's a quiz on all this tomorrow, guys. So I hope you're taking notes. So as we got more sophisticated with our hobby, and then on what's on screen, and as the audience got more sophisticated, and as that nasty thing, the internet and digital connectivity came along in the 90s and in the aughts. To answer your question finally, that's when everybody kind of started paying more attention, and more people realized there were just more people out there, and people could, be aware of that. And there was also Star Trek was ramping up, period. So it all happened about the same time. But when Jeff did this for Enterprise, he was really paying attention to what are the stars. If I'm going to take Eta Lupi and I'm going to say, well, that's, Gugosh in the alien word from this episode from Enterprise, but I'm going to say that's what it is, so I've got a connection to it, and it works out story-wise. Well, I'm going to make sure and also find a star that's an F, G, K, or M class that works for it. Clear as mud?
Sure. No, I was honestly just curious who it was, because that was never. You and I watched Star Trek in a very different way. First of all, I was more of a next-gen guy, so people were already starting to think about this kind of thing, but it never occurred to me to wonder how could they go from here to there, and so I was just curious when the
it never
began.
When I was a kid, I never thought about it either. It wasn't until I saw, again, the first concordance, the first encyclopedia, and went, oh my God, look at all these things. They should be organized. And to know that some of them were real and some weren't, so I wonder what that would look like. And then to see that other people, official people with books in print, were taking a stab at it, but they barely scratched the surface. There's only 10% of the things in here. Franz Joseph Schnabelt, you should have had why don't you have the whole thing done? Filled in. Just like, why don't you have a page for everything? Where are the deflector shields, Franz Joseph? So anyway, but that's another case where real science. Now, if you look at this page in the book and the map at the same time, you've got the Star Trek planet scale with class M and all that, which isn't real. And eventually when we get to, we're now scanning planets so far away that maybe eventually there'll be a planet scale. And maybe real science will pay homage to Star Trek. Pay homage to Star Trek and have class M be Earth-like planets, blah, blah, blah. But they didn't with the galactic coordinates. Although that might evolve. We get Zephyr Cochrane and the Vulcans coming by, and we might not. Now, not everything you see on the show, this is a paste-up board, to answer your other question, is not exact science all the time, 24/7. This is one of those star boards. This got reused a lot in Next Generation. But if the big things you can see there are kind of, Starbase 27, But if you start looking at the little names, you weren't going to see that on your TV in the 80s and 90s. Now you can, HD, and this is the paste-up board. But this is all like the crew names and everything. So there's still room for that kind of thing if it's just a throwaway, thing online. But again, by the time Voyager was coming down the pike and we're talking about getting from the Delta Quadrant back home, Jeff Mandel was working on the show. There was a very famous star map done first season, Next Generation, that people loved. It's very sentimental. It was behind Admiral Remek's, alien-possessed body when his guts are shot out by phaser. And it's the big map behind that. And Memory Alpha and a lot of people hung onto that. And it was Mike Okuta's first attempt at this. And it got refined later on, but nobody wanted to let it go. Not until Jeff did this on Voyager did we finally get, it's looking at it backwards. Here's Earth up there, the circle, and the near Federation. So that's home, quote unquote, in a rough way. And so we're looking at it from the Delta and the Gamma side of things, not from the Alpha and Beta. But it's still the clock. There's still the center of the galaxy. There's still the Federation homeworlds up there. And here's where the caretaker sucked them to. And now here's where they're, headed back. And he even put a timeline down here with the major, when they would get an artificial bump home. And here's where they are. And of course, at the end of the show, they barely got up to the Beta Delta Quadrant boundary, and then Endgame happened, and they used the transport conduits and got home in a hurry. But this was a big chart in astrometrics that started popping up the last couple of years, and Jeff was working on his book, and so this kind of popped up. But finally, this is really kind of the first time the quadrants and kind of the layout actually was on screen as canon. It kind of went by a lot of people, but yeah, this is to the level that things were at by then, complete with like star dates. And at the beginning they were messing around with the Kazons and they were like creeping along. And then they got bumps from different plot developments.
Larry, I have a question.
And moved on. Yeah, where?
I'm looking at this map.
Uh-huh.
And this is the line for Voyager, right?
Right.
Is this supposed to be that season premiere episode night? I don't know, because it's just like a big empty spot. Obviously, there's some stars in any empty spot, but...
Oh, you mean literally? I don't know.
It looks like the right spot for that episode.
Well, it's an overlay. Now, there you go. So that's an overlay of the arms. The arms of the galaxy all have real, you can see them. They're named here, right?
Yeah.
And this has got the real science of red lines, but if we just took it back and made a bar line through here, the Scutum Centaurus arm over there, that would be the delta if the line went through the middle of the galaxy, not through sun, through our system. So if you just move the red line up, we'd have the quadrants here, just like, Star Trek has. And so the Ocampa and the caretaker, who was actually in the scene, no one ever remembers he actually had a species name. But anyway, they would be up there, like to the right of the 0 degrees, and then coming back. So this is the actual, imaging of the Milky Way. And so when Jeff did this, he used the actual imaging, the best available imaging. So it would be insanely wonderful if, the void from the night occurred with one of those big gap areas between the arms, right?
It just seemed like the right spot, but
it is.
Wrong.
It's no. There's no right or wrong here. It would be wonderful.
It's like they thought about it, when they made this. So.
Well, no. Brandon and whoever sat down and went, let's have them go through a big desert of stars for the season opener. No one said, you think they're about here by now? No one said that, right?
Okay.
But it's on whether it's like Mike and Rick or Andre Bermanis on the show, or 10 or 20 years later, we're sitting around doing this and trying to massage it and retcon it in. But that's an awesome idea. It would be wonderful if that area was where that was all taking place. But at the time, no, not really. But this was the first time it got on screen. Now, what I've got up next is when I got to do the big posters, I got to update for the last 3 years of Enterprise and the sliver of Prime Universe at the beginning of Star Trek 09. The Romulus subspace shockwave supernova, the way it's been retconned officially. But also the last 3 years of Enterprise, including the whole Xindi thing, which was wacky because if you look at the near, where are we? If you look at the near space here, so here's here's Jeff's book from '02, and you can see where he's got like, here's Castor, right? So Castor is an ancient Arab name. Castor and Pollux look like they're twin stars, but they're actually, from Earth, they look like they're twins. But if you do the line of sight from, I'm not going to do this. Remember your virtuality. From, can I do this? Anyway, it's right here next to Briar Patch. So right here. Okay. Alpha Geminorum. So Gemini, right? It's the brightest star in the Gemini constellation when you're standing on Earth. Out here, nobody cares. But it's also got the ancient Earth name Castor. Castor and Pollux. Pollux 4 was where they found, what's his name? The god, Apollo. Again, Earth is cut off because if you find the concentric circles here and go back, that's where Sol would be. But I was trying to focus in down here to show you something in a second. But if you look around, you'll see, here's Risa. Well, Jeff, I think, is the one that just retconned Risa and the Risa star and system to be Epsilon, whatever that is. Looks like, I can't tell. It's Epsilon something that's a real constellation. That fits in a story way, and it's close in, so that now that we know Archer's bunch went to Risa, it can't be that far out. So it fits in a story way. So here's the Briar Patch from Insurrection, the Allura, here's the Sona. Those are all decisions that Jeff made when he first put this together, but you're juggling all kinds of things. But it's a mix of, if there was a fictional name, he tried to piggyback it onto a real star on top of all the other one name, like Regulus is an ancient name. It's Alpha Leonis. It's the brightest star in the constellation Leo. Oh, and I ran away from my panel. Whoa. But what that is the whole thing of the Delphic Expanse supposedly happened between Earth and Kronos. The red area is the Klingons, the Klingon Empire, and the border and outposts. And Kronos is actually down there in the bottom left corner, or bottom right corner. So the thing there were specific things they laid out about the Delphic Expanse. And when I was trying to figure out how in the heck to fit it in here, because it's pretty tight. The Delphic Expanse was like 20,000 light years long, and these are 20 by 20 sectors that Jeff and Mike kind of figured out together. So when I was doing the first edition of Star Cartography, I finally figured out a way to make sense. And Spock and Kirk would be proud of me because I didn't think like Khan. I thought three-dimensionally. So if you took the plate and you looked at the plate sideways like the galaxy, the only way, there's some story points. You always go back and go, well, in one story they were 50 light years away. Azadi Prime was supposed to be 50 light years from Earth up here, right? And how did they enter the Delphic Expanse 50 light years away, travel, and now they're someplace that's also 50 light years away. And the whole thing is supposed to be 2,000 light years long. And each of those square sectors is only a 20 by 20. And finally, I was like, oh, let's go sideways. And let's say, instead of thinking of it in the, it's a wet lasagna noodle that hangs down sideways. So we're looking at the galaxy sideways here, not looking down on it as the big disk, but we're looking at it from the side. And let's say Sol and Earth that's the galactic, middle when we look at it from the plate. So the Delphic Expanse, the only way it fits is for it to be basically up and down if you look at the galaxy sideways. And if you look at it from the top, it's got a little tiny, the way we wound up doing it. Did I put one of those in? Maybe not. But the way we wound up doing it is it has a tiny footprint when you look above. It just stretches like this. And Enterprise, Archer's bunch, goes in up there, and as they're going through the expanse, it nearly kills them to penetrate the barrier. And then as they are flying through the expanse, they're coming down that way. And that's the only way they hit Azadi Prime, and they can still be 50 light years from Earth. Or that's the only way I could figure out. Anyway, but that's an example of, there you go, real science, and even canon Star Trek, and even them not knowing what they were doing, just saying it. And now we're trying to pick up the pieces and make it make sense. I didn't put it in here, but Jeff didn't try to do this, and heaven forbid Mike and Doug Drexler try to do it during DS9. But one of the things I was really proud of with my book, Stellar Cartography and the Maps, was to make sense of the Dominion War, finally. So, there we are again. So basically the footprint is, you see it up there, but now the expanse is in there where it's supposed to be. It just goes up and down and it's kind of bent. But the thing that's really fun is when Discovery got going with the Klingon War. So that pink there down here that you see in the bottom, this is out of, it's kind of enhanced and souped up in color, but that pinkish thing that looks almost like a jellyfish or a sea anemone or whatever is, that's the Delphic expanse. But again, we're looking at it in the plane view, so it's like we've cut it in half. So we're looking at the lower half, right? But there's the Delphic expanse coming from that angle, and then it would come on up towards you if you were looking sideways. So up here you see Earth. There where all the original Federation people are. The little, looks like a Mickey Mouse head with the concentric circles, and Kronos down there. But what was cool was our friend John Van Sitters and everybody in licensing, when Discovery started up, sent them all the reference they could take. And so when you're in Lorca's war room, you can see the boundary, the Federation Klingon boundary there is following, there's a couple of weird things, like they have the stars. They don't bother to say, oh, the Romulan neutral zone is up here. That kind of got left off the map. And I know it's because they're thinking, let's not complicate this. Let's not complicate this for the viewers. And there's a couple of other odd bird little things that popped up, but it was really cool and gratifying to see them do this, to the point that later on, where Admiral Cornwell is hijacked, they're going to Cancri for a peace conference. So Cancri is the Latin word for cancer, and I'm thinking that's pretty specific. That's such a specific thing for the early writers on Discovery to do, and everything is happening. They reference the where are we at here? Here, let me go to this one. So this is a really close-up version. So I've put Pavo in. Some of the things from Discovery. But this and Eurydia was a planet where the Euridians are from, Next Generation era, the information merchants. And Discovery said, oh, there's a Euridian nebula. So, well, the Euridian nebula has to be near Eurydia. And now some of the new star bases they mentioned in Pavo and everything has to be in there. And when Sarek's shuttle goes off course because of the terrorist and they overshoot and have to come back. So we figured all that in, but here's a close-up of this section. Everything that's in red is what we added for the first season of Discovery. So there's Doctoria Alpha, where Burnham's folks were killed on the border there. That makes sense. There's Pavo. But the thing I wanted to get to is 81 Cancri is an actual star. When they ran out of Greek letters, they would use numbers. And that's where Vulcan's star, 41 Eridani, came from. So it's dim from Earth, but who cares what it looks like from Earth? It's a trinary, and that's been Vulcan's adopted star since the 70s. But I just realized that Cancri is this star, 81 Cancri is a star right there in the middle of all this activity, and I found out later I was right. I just had a hunch that it was a throwaway planet, they had goofy aliens, and they all got mowed down when it was a Klingon plot to kidnap Sarek, but it wound up being Cornwell. So the Cancri people and the planet they went to is a planet around 81 Cancri. So from now on, I just kind of put 81 in brackets and say Cancri. But again, there's a perfect example of mixing the real. And now we've got canon stuff, and Discovery's art staff is looking at what we've done and taking that and doing to the point where, what am I doing? Oh, how am I? There we go. To the point where when they were tracking Spock, the hunt for Spock, #2, you could barely see her console, but I realized that they're using the stars, and it's kind of blurry on your screen, but I was able to do this. And he's really like going over the boundary. He's like behind Klingon space back into Federation space at this point, which was interesting. But it was, again, gratifying to know they were still using our graphics. And then, not my stuff, but it was so fun because I can do a basic, where are the Klingons, Romulans, the Cardassians, the Dominion, the Borg, and how the quadrants go. I don't know if anybody saw this. It's another reason to watch social media. This came across on Michael Chabon's Instagram just a few months ago. After the Picard show staff started, the writing room got together. And it's awesome because basically this is Kirsten Beyer, who a lot of you know. She wrote the Voyager. She didn't just write awesome Voyager post-return novels. She pulled in all the other bits of the canon, and old and new, and used them in her stories, characters and events. And that's part of the reason why Brian Fuller scooped her up to have her on his writing staff. And she's now on the writing staff, the writing room for Picard. And Michael Chabon, who won a Pulitzer Prize and is a huge Trek nerd and is fitting right in, hopefully, apparently. But he did this because I was hoping this was a napkin, but apparently it's a whiteboard. It would have been awesome if it was a napkin. But I saw this and I went, oh, this is so cool, because I read the story, but basically they're telling all the writers in the room how the basic Star Trek galaxy lays out, how our local space lays out. Well, this is the galaxy. She basically went, okay, zoom, zoom, little crosshairs, bang, bang, alpha, beta, gamma, delta. Got your quadrants. You got your Earth about here. You got your Klingons down here. You got your Romulans over here. Now, that's not quite to scale, but she probably added on to it as they went along. You got your Klingons here. You got your Romulans here. Here's the neutral zone. You can see where she made the kind of a wall there. She goes, now your Borg are up here, and here's your transwarp conduits. And 70,000 light years, and you got your Dominion over here, and here's Cardassian Bajor over here. I mean, it's wonderful. It was like she just went zing, zing, ding, ding, bang, 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 bang. There's your Star Trek layout for the layman right there in 15 pen strokes. And I was just thrilled because I knew that if that's what's happening in the Picard writing room, it was another hope that things are going to be all well with that show. But there you go. That's kind of the last actual slide I had, guys. I mean, is anybody awake still? I was kidding. There is no quiz tomorrow.
Yeah, we're still awake.
Yeah. Okay. Good. I ran into a guy on the sofa at the end of the con I was just at back Sooner Con, and I got sucked into a discussion about all this. And an hour later, I didn't think I was going to get away. He was tickling me right where I wanted to be tickled, but I kept thinking, are you sure you want to keep talking about this? And he was just fascinated. But there you go. So yeah, stellar cartography, Star Trek. It's amazing. For something that started off like going through 2 or 3 iterations by fans, nobody on the shows, aside from like Star at a Time, tried to keep a handle on it. There was no rhyme or reason. It's kind of amazing that through some fan iterations and then what Mike did, and then kind of massaging things. Mike is the one that basically said, we'll put the Klingons and Romulans here in that scale. And once he did that, and say the Borg are up in the Delta Quadrant, that's a very basic thing to do. But once and say, there's the curve, the old famous chart from Balance of Terror with the neutral zone in it. And once he did that, then everything else was, off and running. And then Jeff added this incredible layer of real detail, did a computer program where not the way we see stars from Earth, but the way they would be if we were looking at that galactic plate. And then tried to find life-bearing stars with alien names on them if that had to be done, if they were supposed to have life-bearing Class M-type planets. And then since the early days of Voyager, it was easy for me to come along and do a retcon for the 2013, and figure out how to do that once I had everything else in place, and build on it there again for first year. But the second book, there were a lot of original series stars that Jeff left out for some reason or whatever. So I put about 40 original series places in, and then we got everything from the first season of Discovery in this last update. And every single starbase ever mentioned is now located, even from the animateds. So, and like I said, the Dominion War is now choreographed and makes sense.
If anybody has questions, feel free to ask when you're ready.
Yeah. I don't know how we're on time. I'm totally lost. I can't see
15 minutes.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay. So, Ken, play layman for me here. And
Well, I
your
don't
head's
know what-
exploding? Is that
I
what
don't
that
know
is?
what to ask exactly. I mean, there are a couple of things that I wonder about. I mean, on the one hand, I look at this and I say, okay, well, you tell me. I mean, you're excited that Kristen made that map, right? I mean,
Mhm.
do you think for most people, does having a system, does having an order to the whole thing make it? And I guess I would ask everybody here as well. Does having an order to it, having a system to it, make the stories make more sense to you? Or is this just like, okay, well, that's cool for the people who care about that. I'm just here for the story.
Well, for me personally, today, I've always imagined Star Trek taking place over lots of galaxies. I've never even considered it being all in the Milky Way.
So did I just crush your dream, or?
No, I don't know.
Well, the Milky Way is so vast.
And that's also started me thinking about what I've been told, my basic understanding of time traveling through space away from Earth. If you're traveling at light years and then you come back again, you're an old man to your kids are old men to you, or they're old because you've traveled away from Earth. And back and no time's passed on Earth. Now, how on earth are we going around the galaxy and getting back to Earth and
without having that
time? Yeah,
because a warp drive, you're in a subspace bubble. It's the same kind of remember how they explained First Contact following the Borg sphere, and how the ship went back in time, but nothing else. You remember how that was? It was like we're protected from outside. That's what subspace is. That's how the goofy supernova in Star Trek 09 was retconned, because a supernova is an exploding star. Well, it may affect, a little beyond its own system. You might have ripples of whatever on neighboring stars, but there's no way they were talking about how the Romulan supernova, which then was even retconned onto a star. We didn't even know where it was coming from. And then the comic book Countdown, Orsi and Kurtzman gave it a name with a writer, Hobus. So there's a star Hobus, and it had this shockwaves of this supernova, and somehow Romulus and Remus were wiped out. Well, Hobus isn't Romulus and Remus's star. So how is this thing like so huge that it's spreading across different systems? And in the comic, they fixed it to say, and this was professionals, not fans. They fixed it at the time, thank God, because I was working on my charts at the same time trying to make sense of it. So the reason that it wiped out Romulus and Remus, the reason that Spock got involved to save the Federation in like local space, was because it was a mega supernova. It wasn't behaving like a normal It was way huger. And not only that, it seemed like it was like skipping in and out. It was like hopscotching somehow. And they retconned it to me that it was going in and out of subspace, which meant that now that's okay. Well, now we get it why it's not just one continuous, you think of Praxis exploding in Star Trek 6 and you saw that shock wave come out, or the shock wave of anything coming out. But the supernova in 09 was like affecting some places and not affecting other places. And it was going to go on forever for some weird reason. And so Spock and his little red matter stopped it, but not before Romulus and Remus were lost. And so they've retconned that to say that it was a shockwave supernova that came in and out of subspace. So the retcon. And then Star Trek Online, the game, went back and retconned it further and said it wasn't even organic. It wasn't a natural event. It was an act of sabotage, like a massive bomb set off. But yeah, that's why here on when Mike first set this out, that's why because warp speed is supposed to work at a certain thing, like you were talking about. People sat down and worked on warp, but Gene, famously said to his writers in the 60s, and it's still just as germane as it was then. In the writer's guide, trying to tell these TV writers not to be freaked out by writing science fiction, like Matt Dillon on Gunsmoke didn't stop and talk about how his .45 caliber gun worked, right? Nobody talked about all the parts of a horse outfit from the shoes to the saddlebag, unless it was a story point. So don't worry about that. Just let it come up when it needs to come up in the natural flow of the story. So it's lovely that you didn't realize that it was just in the Milky Way, much less like knowing exactly how a warp drive works. But after 53 years, there's been so many clues and people trying to keep it together so that they don't go in 9 different directions. Because the original series did. The original series did go all over the place, and they got it under control by Next Gen time.
I was going to say, I think I was thrown off by the opening title sequence of Next Generation, making it look like you're flying out of the Milky Way, or that's what it seemed like to me. you've got that gas
Yeah.
cloud.
I'm
and
trying to think.
that little bulge. I always thought that was Milky Way galaxy or something.
It
Oh, I
might-
see
I'm-
what you're saying. Yeah, yeah.
So it felt to me like we're leaving the galaxy.
or like the camera or the point of view is coming in. Well, it switched, right? On one of them, they started in the solar system and went out, and then the other one they did. But that's why in the third or fourth show, where no man's gone before, where no one has gone before, they're in a totally different. They hop across the galaxy, and then they're in a totally different galaxy, and that's why they're saying we'll never get home, and that's why Kirk, Spock, McCoy, and Scotty with the Kelvin, they're hijacked by the Kelvins in human form, and they're in between galaxies. And if you go, and it's like good on them way back in '68 for keeping this basic kind of science, going. That they were out in an intergalactic void between the galaxies.
What's the deal on the galactic barrier that they always seem to cross? Yeah.
I don't know. What do you want it to be?
Well, it's always what do you think? So you're an amateur astronomer. You said you've kind of visualized this in both the fictional world and the real world. So when they go through this barrier, what do you think is really there? Nothing. Or
there's something there, and what does Spock say? It's negative energy. Blah, blah. Anyway, in real science, it's not like there's a halo surrounding the entire Milky Way, and the Milky Way is arms, like those black areas you wanted to be in that one area where the void was for Voyager. That's just, it's not empty space, but it's the density of stars. It's like it's rotating, and those are the arms that are being thrown out. So to think of it as a disk with a maybe we've never seen a huge area. We've only seen the local area where the ship tried to go through, and only in the original series, right? So maybe it's just there, but in those big voidy areas, it's silly to think that there's actually like a plate shaped, with a bulge in the middle for the galactic center. Like there's a plate shaped energy field everywhere, but
that's what it looks like.
Nobody's ever gone back to that. Well, nobody in 2019 has gone back to that,
except for Vic and the crew of Continues, right?
Right, and now, but they were pretending to be in 1970. Nobody since the 60s has tried to postulate that. It'd be funny if Discovery or Picard, any modern show ever tries to go back and.
And the truth is, we really don't know. I mean, we can only theorize, right? So there is a sort of barrier around our solar system, and we still haven't really crossed it with the Voyager probe, so we don't really know. It's not going to be a visual field of energy, but it could be something.
Are you saying the origin of Voyager might be much closer than we thought?
No, I was talking about the real life Voyager probes who are somewhere in the Oort cloud or something.
Yeah, I know. I'm just saying if humans got Espered going through the barrier, and that maybe the Voyager craft get elevated.
I'm kind of concerned the Borg are so close to us.
Oh, that's far. That's so far away.
Doesn't look that. It looks tiny.
They've got capital letters. It's serious.
Yeah. This is the stuff of your nightmares tonight now. And look, I love the way he drove that line like they're like coming our way. It's like just sitting up there. They're down there. But that's why, on Voyager, they went 2 or 3 a year. A lot of us that had seen this there's a couple of diagrams late in Next Generation that dealt with Borg occasionally where they would kind of say this, but the whole thing about, it's on film, it's canon now. This was the behind the scenes since 4th season Next Generation, but it really hadn't been on screen. But a lot of us that paid attention to this were going, Voyager's going to be in the Delta Quadrant. Are they going to hit the Borg soon? And in the beginning, Voyager was supposed to be all about things we've never seen before, and it's going to be hard to come up with, alien races and civilizations, but that's what we're going to make ourselves do. And then they sat with the Kazon for 2 years.
So if your ship breaks down and you fall out of subspace, you're screwed.
If you're way away, if you're not near anything. If your truck breaks down and you're in the middle of Wyoming, you're screwed.
Everything's aging around you at a rate of knots, is it not?
The what?
Everything is aging around you at a rate of just as soon as
I see what you mean. Yeah, then you get in the time dilation.
You ever knew is already aging at super rate.
Yeah. Well, that's where you crack out your orb of time you've kept aboard ship, and you.
That's why we have. That's why we have star dates now.
So.
Yeah.
You just reset the clock, get the stardate clock, and everything's fine.
There you go. You play a little soundtrack music. You're like, doodle 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 doodle
Or it's like
doodle.
that episode where the Enterprise was 17 days off. Oh, we'll just reset the clock.
It's like going from Julian to Gregorian calendar. We'll just, yeah.
Has anybody started doing this for Orville?
I bet I don't know of anybody, and I haven't been wading through the Orville fan nonfiction world, but I would bet
it becomes quite canon now.
I would bet that there's one or two or three people out there somewhere doing it. Yeah,
It's such a different time today, though. If you're going to make a galaxy or a universe like this, I mean, somebody at Fox, I would imagine, has to be charting everything that's happening in the Orville in the hopes of selling games and video games and books and concordances, and also just, stopping people like, Larry back in the day writing in and going, excuse me, how do they get from here to here in the space of an episode?
Well, to answer your question, Ken, that you had, you asked, is this really important, I guess, or when did it become important? I think when you get to a certain point in a canon, it does. It just got so big. And now they want to have a show in the Delta Quadrant. They want to have DS9 go to the Gamma Quadrant. So you have to sort of start mapping it out. And so the same thing will happen if the Orville lasts as long as Star Trek does, or even a little bit more. Somebody's going to start mapping it.
It's like everything else. If you're trying to have a timeline in a canon way, and you're trying to have people and technology, and your warp engines are working a certain way, and it doesn't change every 3 weeks, this is one of those things.
Well, it's weird. I mean, it now you get into questions of what kind of storytelling you want, right? Because they went to an old West planet that looked like the set of Our Town in the original series, right? They were not worried about, okay, does it make any sense that we were at this one planet last week, this other planet this week? One of my favorite stories, and it only kind of applies here, but it's just amazing. It's something that my co-host on Mission Log, John, mentioned one time. I think it was the episode Court Martial. They were getting ready to have a trial, and so they wanted to record what they were saying. And in the script, it said somebody goes up and starts the tape. And Gene was like, it's not going to be tape. And they're like, okay, well, what's it going to be? It's like, well, I don't know, but it's 300 years from now. It's not going to be tape. And so they just came up with a thing, and they didn't really care what it was, sort of like what Larry was saying about how Matt Dillon didn't care how his gun worked. He just made sure that it did. They just came up with a thing. They're like, okay, this is what we're going to use instead of tape. But there was no okay, well, how does that work, and what would that be, and what would that do? I mean, it was enough of a futuristic sheen. I mean, I guess maybe it was just saying it with conviction. It wasn't like, well, somehow we made it to this planet this week. It's more like, no, we're on this planet. And nobody really cared where they were last week or where they were going next week. Well, I shouldn't say nobody, because
and then part of it was, what's the flux of, stardates were so wacky. Well, the early shows, they would try to film them, and then they would go, we don't have time to do all the effects. Quick, put this one further back in the schedule. And it would be crazy. The aired stardates are out of order with the production stardates, but
that's great.
Which got better as by the next gen time things were better. But
the other thing I realized today is that Star Wars is nowhere even close to Star Trek.
No, it's in a galaxy far
away.
The map would be way back there at the other end of the room, probably.
Yeah, right. But if this is all in the galaxy, then
or farther.
It's super far.
See, that's why it's not like, that's a cute tagline, right? In a galaxy, a long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away. Well, that's a cool way, and it's very iconic, and it was a great way to open the movie. But if you really stop and think about that, in a very subtextual way, it's why you'll never hear, Alpha Centauri and Rigel and Deneb and all the common, little star names, much less the obscure ones.
Well, they never said far, far away from Earth, did they?
Well, they're telling the story here.
Well, if it's a galaxy far, far away, but my point is, you'll never hear anything familiar sounding as a place name in Star Wars, because it's supposed to be.
That's funny. There was actually there's a line that Han Solo says in Star Wars where he's like, if we did this and we did this, we'd fly right through the solid Earth. And I was like, wait a minute, what? That can't possibly be. How do they even know that word? And I got over it over the 40 years since, I guess.
Well, then you retcon it with that Earth is the people that want us to think of our formal name of our planet, aside from Sol 3, is Terra, because that's a Latin language. But basically, any native people are going to call their world Earth.
Right.
I mean, in their language, right?
Right.
Anything that, whatever they call it, will be their native word for whatever Earth is, or dirt ball rock, or whatever it is, right? So it's okay if a native, we're assuming we're in that other galaxy and we're listening through universal translators the whole time, if you want to go there. So whatever, if Luke Skywalker said something up through a solid Earth, it's just translating.
That was Han Solo.
And let's say they ever managed, let's say Star Trek
Han Solo,
ever managed to get to the galaxy that Star Wars happened in. How enlightened would that galaxy be when they got there? Given that is a long time ago.
It's so dirty, and they're always fighting. It's hard to imagine they would be.
Yeah. Or they're overly bureaucratic.
Who can say? Although we actually, on Mission Log Live the other day, we were talking with the guy from IDW, and the question that we put to them is, do you want to see a Star Trek, Star Wars comic book crossover? It was a resounding no from everybody who was watching, but it sounds like you could write it if you wanted to,
Because you'd have to bridge time and space, apparently. So
yeah. Well, time crystals,
no, because
kyber
you'd just be
crystals.
traveling to the future of Star Wars. And
We're in the future of Star Wars.
You'd be seeing how evolved or how devolved they are.
right. I mean, we're in their future. I mean, they from 1977.
Yeah,
they're a long time ago. So whatever that is, 200 years, 2 million years, whatever. I don't
50 years is a long.
But it's a thing, and you can do this. The start, Firefly went through a thing where Jeff Mandel actually did a lot of backgrounding in Firefly officially for licensed things, and did a Firefly map, and they talk about the Earth that was. So they're in the Milky Way too, but it's it's an amazing thing. But very few. What I didn't realize after we got into this was just Star Trek, but apparently there's a huge hobby of fantasy mapping, like the Oz fantasy, of course, Middle Earth. But Tolkien did his own maps. And L. Frank Baum did his own maps of how Oz was laid out and the four countries around the Emerald City. But there's a whole hobby of people that collect and get into fantasy realm. They either just collect the paper, or they just get off on that, the fantasy realms of made up worlds. But I don't think anything is like for the detail and the complexity and the fact that fans came in and legitimized it and bridged it over, and because when Mike did this, he looked around at what fans had done at the time, like they do a lot of times on the show. I don't think there's anything with the pedigree and the history that Star Trek's, fake. And eventually, like I said, those real life guys are going to take the crossbar off of Earth and move it up there because it makes no sense for everything to be so Earth centric. It's not much good when you're across the galaxy and you're trying to map. Okay, I'm mumbling myself now, guys.
Anybody else have any other questions?
Yeah.
I do have one, but related to the Borg in particular.
Okay.
Now, memory serves, Borg are almost completely machine, correct?
Basically, but they're taking over organic beings and machinifying them, injecting with nanoprobes, but they're using the organic of whatever the original species was.
System have they corrupt?
Now,
but go ahead, yeah.
Now, if they're mainly machine after they've been altered, why do they go in fighting them conventionally when you could just launch an EMP at them and be done with it?
Oh, all right.
Okay.
This is all ruined.
What, like a sleep command isn't good enough for you? It has to be an EMP. Or a never used virus?
I know he's kidding, but I mean, my guess would actually be
penetrate them. So I've read them; they're pretty pathetic.
I would think the biggest problem would be that you would just destroy the ship that you're on, or at least completely disable the ship that you're on, trying to do that.
Yeah, how would you do a quadrant ride EMP?
Everybody's thinking pretty hard about that one.
Shielding.
Oh, we're missing it.
Well, you're kind of like back to the Hobus supernova. How big can your EMP pulse, which is redundant, your EM pulse be if the Borg, transwarp conduits take up half of that quadrant? Can you really project an EMP pulse? Because if you don't, it's like, if you don't use enough of your antibiotic, it'll just come back and, whatever you knock down Whatever you don't kill
Imagine
gets stronger.
the
and
blackouts
it'll
you're
come back.
putting on undeveloped worlds.
And
Yeah.
the Borg
Yeah.
had adaptive shielding, so they probably could adapt to EMP poses.
Yeah.
I love it because I think he was joking, but now we're all like, well, no, hold on.
You also have to get your
Half
pulse rate right for
So the
whatever
blackout
you're
of such
targeting.
and such was caused by energy beam fired through the galaxy. Blacking out.
Yeah. But my point was, it'd be so difficult to get the entire Borg continuum that there would be something left that they would come back and reactivate. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's like
Are
the
they dead?
eternal
'Cause
anime.
I've wondered, are the Borg actually dead now because of what?
Probably until some writer wants to write
Exactly.
something with them again.
Spoiler alert.
Well, no, I mean, you know, probably.
I mean, haven't the book series revived them? I don't know.
I have no idea.
Of course, that's not on film.
Or did she just get rid of one queen? Is that?
There's more than one queen.
Yeah, right. So that's nothing.
You got your Alice Krieger queens, and you got your Susanna Thompson queens for starters. So
I'm going to say no, they're not safe from the Borg yet.
okay,
It sounds like you're programming a drag show.
if that helps you to sleep less at ease tonight, then so be it. Whatever, yeah.
Highly unlikely.
Whatever tucks you in at night.
It could make sense that they would still be alive. If they're machinery, good chance they can, essentially use, in layman's terms, a wireless connection, back themselves up to another body.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Well, let's do the math. I mean, they're up to species, 10, 11, 12,000? So if you say an average of 1 billion per species, there's got to be trillions and quadrillions of them out there.
Yeah.
Well, this is all fiction anyway.
That's settled the room fast. Yeah. Oh, somebody's doing math, and it's really disquieting. Yeah. Can we just go back to how Starfleet ships are supposed to be in order, and we just play with those numbers? Those are shinier and prettier, and yeah. Yeah. Well, so what the original Borg Queen was Species 1? Wouldn't it be sad to be Species 1? Because Species 1 wouldn't have been the original Borg, right? Species 1 would have been the first assimilated.
I think she says she's from species something like 10157 or something like that.
A 2-digit or a 3-digit species, yeah.
Yeah.
Forgive me for not knowing off the top of my head, but
Remember the Borg babies from the first time we saw them?
Yep.
Yeah, they were cute.
There's a Borg baby tucked away on Voyager that no one ever talked about ever again in that group. And and every year I'd go, you got to do something with the Borg babies, the Borg baby, and they're like, well, we're thinking about it, and it's like, okay, yeah.
All right. Well,
hanging threads.
Did you want to tell people where they can find out more about the book, by the way? Because I mean,
oh yeah,
you talked about past books, but I mean, didn't you just redo Stellar Cartography?
So when I was going by dates. So Jeff Mandel did the book in 2003, which was awesome, except people complained that they wanted a big image, and you'd see people scanning the pages and putting a big image together. So the poster said, this is great because it's not just straight on Federation, modern. There's historical, there's Klingons and Cardassian maps and Romulan charts and an ancient Vulcan map of just their system. So there's 10 maps and a guidebook. And the original publishers came up with the idea, came to me to do it. And that came out in 2013. And that was the update where I figured out the Delphic Expanse and choreographed the Dominion War and updated from Jeff's last go with the book for the 3 years of Enterprise. And then that was 2013. 2018, they wanted to update it to have it, be kind of splashy and have as much of Discovery as we could. And then I went back to them and said, well, in the time since, we figured out that there were some things missing from way back in Jeff's book. So they were very nice, and we put those in too. So there's a ton of, like I said, the 2018 edition has all that in red added. That's just one tiny spot, obviously. So, you're getting the new one when you get the Pepto-Bismol purple nebula up here. The old one is kind of greenish in cast. This one has that pink nebula in the top corner. So,
and if anybody wants to check it out, where?
Oh, the easiest way is just come to my site, LarryNemecek.com, and go to my store, and there's a link that will take you there. And I might get 47 cents out of it if you.
47.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's amazing. One more thing. But if you're at LarryNemecek.com, you can also see all my other things going on, as Ken so nicely said, including Portal 47, our
Yes.
Minicon all year long program.
And the Trek files and all that other stuff too.
The Trek files, and yes, the Trek files every Tuesday from Roddenberry.
Yes.
Podcasts. And I do a live show every Tuesday on Facebook, on my Trek Facebook page, Trekland Tuesdays Live, at Larry Nemecek's Trekland, and at Larry Nemecek on Twitter, and other things too. But that's probably the nugget.
Cool. Thanks, Larry.
Well, thanks for having me
Thanks
on.
for doing this. Well, I mean,
enough of these, and I may get used to this finally. I think I'm only partly wrapped up in my cable, but I'm.
Yes, thank you for exploding my brain tonight.
Yeah, any brains left unexploded, we can take care of that. But maybe we should stop now.
There's 5 minutes left. If anybody wants to.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
Get your questions in.
we're awash with time.
Yeah, I would leave it on this, but I think it's too blurry to see by the time it's this huge. But like Jeff did most of the work on this.
I don't know
as
if
far as
people noticed,
locations.
but there's these things that you could actually look at it on.
yeah, Bjorn, I'm sorry, Cerebus, has done all of the work on this. In fact, next Thursday night, for anybody who's interested, we have. So Roddenberry actually did a movie years ago, or was one of the producers on a movie years ago called White Room. And it was shot at the time for actually a pad like that, or for your smartphone. It was shot in 360 degree. And so, somebody would be talking over here, you'd hear something behind you. You quickly turn your phone around, you could see that. Well, now we're standing in a virtual reality area. And so next week at, I believe, 7 o'clock again, Mike, is it Mike Aronowitz? It's not Mike. What is his name?
Doug? The
Not
director
Doug.
on Discovery?
No, on White Room.
Oh, sorry.
It's quite all right. Anyway, the director of White Room is going to be here, and then everybody's going to get in that little circle right there, and we're going to hit a command, and we'll actually go up into the ceiling where there's going to be a 360-degree showing of the movie, and you'll actually be able to just turn around and look and see the stuff behind you and things like that. I get to check that out in the next 12 hours or so, but Rod has seen it. John has seen it, and they say that the presentation's absolutely amazing.
Well, it's for once that movie finally gets its due to watch
Right.
it in a circular. Yeah,
Exactly. So Cerebus he did put together those pads. He did actually build this whole theater, and he has made it possible for us to watch that next week. So circle your calendar.
Yeah.
Next Thursday, 7 p.m., we'll be doing the White Room right here in the theater room.
What's interesting is the screen is also showing up on my watch. Here. I don't know.
You can watch?
Yeah, it's just something I got out of the store, but that screen is on the watch here.
Oh, very cool.
I just had a thought question. In the movie, when they're looking at the star charts in Voyager and in the Star Trek movie where Data and Picard are looking at star charts in that room in 3 dimensions.
in actual stellar cartography. Yeah, it's a really a circular kind of chamber.
That's all based from this, I think.
No,
in 3 dimensions. Yeah.
the Generations thing is just a big star thing, and Mike went through and put original series stars. It was 64, and this was all. Well, it didn't really apply because they were looking around them. They weren't looking at a disk view, like looking down at a disk view, so it felt like a map. So yeah, if you blow up one of those panels and try to get it in high def and see, they're just in there random, just like some of the earlier star charts they had done. But here you go, Ken. There's Delta Vega right there. See?
Okay.
Northwest, but it's at the top. So the route of the Enterprise was like to go up to the up to the near skin.
Gotcha.
Yeah. But there's the Herc, like the people that pillaged. The Iconians were supposedly over here. This is, I mean, again, Jeff did all that. But all the major races of the, if you look at this close, the res is holding up better. So there's the Herosian network. There's all the major races. The cultures as they came back. The Malon, the Devore, as they came back. And they got to about there, just about the boundary, and then zipped to home to Earth. Voyager, that is. Yeah. Well, the Doomsday Machine path was one of those things that didn't get included first out. That was one thing I got to do in the 2018 update, was finally put one of my favorite original series pieces in place.
Nice.
Okay, no other questions, guys? I fried your brains way too much.
I have one that's a bit of a joke question, but also serious.
Okay, a half and half.
If Elon Musk offers to send you to space, will you take a copy of Star Trek or a different book with you? You can only take one book.
Well, by book, you mean like a Star Trek book? Or
a Star Trek book.
If I'm in space, what am I doing? What am I reading?
Yeah.
That's a good point.
There's no Wi-Fi in space?
No way.
Well, no, there wouldn't be, would there?
In space, no one can hear you Google. Yeah.
That's true.
No, I would take a phone that had everything loaded on it and a camera. So if I only got one thing, that's what I would do.
Take a camera. Yes.
It's cheating.
Barely get Wi-Fi on Earth sometimes.
Barely get Wi-Fi in the office.
Yeah. But think of the selfies. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
All right, everybody. The event is officially over. So I'm going to go home.
Thanks.
But you're all welcome to stay in. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for coming out, Larry and
Thank you, guys.
Ken.
Thank you. Thank you for having.
We have this recorded if you wanted to relive these excellent memories. And we'll put it up on YouTube and Twitch as well.
Awesome. Okay, cool.
Big round of applause, everybody.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Woo.
Thank you very much.
Yay. This is a little more in the weeds than we get even like at a convention panel, which I haven't done one in ages for this topic. But thank you guys for not dozing off.
Thanks
Hopefully
a lot, everybody.
it was the exploding brains that kept everybody alive, but great. Asleep, awake, yeah. Anyway, and thank you, Ken.
Oh, thanks a lot, Larry. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Goodbye, everybody.
Right, taking off.
Good night.
Take care, guys.
Trek well.